On Tuesday, the Minnesota Vikings officially released Kyle Rudolph. This is the first step for this Vikings rebuild. Now, can you call it a rebuild? Not really. Because, of course, the Vikings are not moving on from Kirk Cousins. They're not moving on from Mike Zimmer yet. So it's not a rebuild per se, but it's definitely a phase where the Vikings have to be looking at what held them back last year and how they can fix this. Well, what held us back last year was not Kyle Rudolph, and I'll say that right now. Kyle Rudolph actually had a pretty solid year when you look at it, because he had some great blocking, and all in all, he didn't drop many passes. I mean, Kyle Rudolph is not I wouldn't say he's not washed up. He is on the decline. He's on the decline, but he's not washed up yet, as a lot of Vikings fans were saying. Now, when that being said, he is not worth $8 million, which he was expected to make in 2021. He is not at all worth that kind of money. And in all honesty, the Vikings shouldn't have given him a contract extension in the first place, whereas the Vikings drafted Tyler Conklin in the 5th round out of the 2018 draft. Year after that, they drafted Irv Smith Jr. out of the 2019 draft in the 2nd round, where the Vikings at the same time gave Kyle Rudolph a contract extension. I mean, we're in a pass-heavy league, but 3 tight ends, 3 elite tight ends is not really what we need. Now, no one expected Tyler Conklin to be as good as he's been, but Irv Smith Jr. is developing into that starting role. Now, is he ready for the starting role yet? A lot of Vikings fans would say yes. However, I would say I think we still need to see more. I think we still need to see more from Irv Smith Jr. Now, he had a great season last year, but I still would like to see more. I saw a lot of drop passes that I did not like, and I saw a lot of missed reads where, I mean, yes, it can be Kirk Cousins' fault, and it can be Irv Smith Jr.'s fault as well when it comes to those. We don't know because we're not here designing the plays, but all in all, I would say I'd need to see more from Irv Smith Jr., and he was not the best tight end on our roster. Now, yes, he had the best year out of any tight end on our roster, but he is not the best tight end on our roster, as that was Kyle Rudolph. The best part about cutting Kyle Rudolph is not saving $5 million in cap space. Although that's a great thing. I mean, the Vikings need all the money that they can save. And Kyle Rudolph is not going to be the only person that the Vikings are going to be cutting. The Vikings should cut Dan Bailey, Britton Colquitt, maybe Shamar Stephen. We'll have to look there. Maybe Anthony Barr. There's a lot of players the Vikings can cut, and this would really help out the cap space. That is not the best part. The best part, Vikings already have 3 tight ends. Vikings don't even need to draft a tight end or look to anyone in free agency. So cutting our tight end 1, everyone just moves up a spot. Irv Smith Jr. is now our tight end 1. Tyler Conklin is now our tight end 2. And Brandon Dillon is now our tight end 3. When Kyle Rudolph got injured, and I've said it multiple times in this podcast and I'll say it again, when Kyle Rudolph got injured, we saw the tight end duo between Tyler Conklin and Irv Smith Jr. And it looked better. It looked like an improved tight end duo. Better than the tight end duo between Irv Smith Jr. and Kyle Rudolph. So these guys are ready. And if we take a quick look at their stats, this is our tight end depth outside of the Kyle Rudolph, who didn't really have a great season. Now, statistically didn't have a good season, but I would say Kyle Rudolph had an acceptable season because they just weren't utilizing him properly. Now, when you look at it though, Irv Smith Jr., 30 receptions, 365 receiving yards with 5 receiving touchdowns. Statistically, Irv Smith Jr. had a great season. This looks great on record as a tight end too. But he suffered with a lot of drop passes. And these stats don't specify it, but he suffered with a lot of drop passes, and any Vikings fan would know, and a lot of missed routes. Now, missed routes can also be a quarterback's fault. Maybe they threw it to the wrong spot. Usually it's the receiver's fault, but Irv Smith Jr., he did suffer. Now, he's well-deserved of the starting role for the Minnesota Vikings, tight end 1. Of course, when you look at it statistically, he is well-deserved of the starting role. Any tight end drafted in the 2nd round usually is the future for the team, whereas I'm kind of surprised the Vikings did give Kyle Rudolph a contract extension. Now, of course, I'll say it, Vikings, we don't want to see Kyle Rudolph go, but it was a needed move. This is undoubtedly a great move for the Vikings. You free up cap space. You have your tight ends already. You have Irv Smith Jr., Tyler Conklin, and Brandon Dillon already. Now, Brandon Dillon, I would say he's ready to be a tight end 3. Now, of course, he just had a 6-yard reception where he played 3 games when Kyle Rudolph was injured. But all in all, we don't need to get anyone. We don't. We have Irv Smith Jr., we have Tyler Conklin, and maybe Brandon Dillon. I mean, we haven't seen enough of this guy, of course, but we have him too. Whereas the Vikings don't need to look to a tight end in the draft or even in free agency. So this is the best part about this. When you look at Tyler Conklin, whereas Kyle Rudolph was injured, I believe it was 4 games, we had Tyler Conklin as our tight end 2, where he had 19 receptions for 194 yards and a touchdown, and then Brandon Dillon, who played 3 games, activated from the practice squad. He was activated to the active roster, where he had a 6-yard reception. So All in all, this is the best part about this. Vikings don't need a new tight end. We have our 3 tight ends right there. This is exactly what we want. We want to use that money from the Kyle Rudolph contract somewhere else. And we don't want it to go back to tight end. We don't need it to go back to tight end. We need it to go to offensive guard or defensive tackle. Maybe safety. I'm not expecting a whole lot of safeties to be available in free agency, but offensive guard is a big one, and we're going to be talking about this, or wide receiver. This is where the money needs to go right now. You look at what held us back last year. Yes, it wasn't wide receiver, but you look at what held us back last year. It was protection for Kirk Cousins and rushing the passer. Those are the two spots, the 2 biggest spots where the Vikings suffered last year. Yes, they didn't have a great coverage grade as well, but a lot of that has to do with very young corners. I mean, our entire corner depth chart is on our rookie contracts. They're all under the age of 26. But outside of that, protecting Kirk Cousins, especially on the interior side of the line, and rushing the passer. This is where the Vikings' money needs to go this offseason. This is where the Vikings have to invest all of their money into. And that's why Kyle Rudolph will not be the only player the Vikings have to cut. They have to cut Dan Bailey. They have to cut Britton Colquitt. Anybody who is not deserving of their full contract, and we can get that money back and move it to offensive line or wide receiver. When I say wide receiver, I'm talking about a wide receiver 3, because if Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson gets injured, I don't want to see what's going to happen next, especially after losing Kyle Rudolph. And then now, we have a lot of pieces on offense already. Wide receiver is not the biggest need. Vikings will probably put less than $10 million on the wide receiver position if they do take a wide receiver 3. Now, all in all, though, Irv Smith Jr. can be our wide receiver 3. We've seen him play from inside the slot, and he can be our wide receiver 3. Tyler Conklin can be a blocking tight end. I mean, realistically, wide receiver is not as big of a need as a lot of Vikings fans are saying, but offensive line and defensive tackle, those are the 2 biggest needs. Rushing the passer and protecting Kirk Cousins on the interior side of the line is where the Vikings suffered last year, and that's where they need to invest this money into this offseason. That's why Kyle Rudolph will not be the only player we will be cutting. Now, Kyle Rudolph, I hate to see him go, but it was a needed decision. Kyle Rudolph's still going to live in Minnesota, too. He's going to go play for maybe the Patriots, or no one wants to go to play, or no one wants to play in Massachusetts. He can go to play for the Cardinals. Cardinals is another spot people are saying he's going to choose Minnesota over Arizona, where he will live in here in the offseason, and which is kind of weird. This is where he's raised his family. His kids are going to school here, so I can kind of see the decision there. It's more about family than business. Anyways, I do think Irv Smith Jr. will be the Vikings breakout player of the year. I wouldn't expect him to have a great of a season as people are saying. Now, once again, I hate to doubt my players, but there is only one ball. We have players, Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook, and Justin Jefferson. There is only one ball. I wouldn't expect that ball to go to Irv Smith Jr. as much as people are saying, although I would like to see it happen. I mean, if Irv Smith Jr. can fix his problem with dropping the ball a lot, then we might have 3 players surpassing 1,000 yards next year. Of course, that would be Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, maybe Adam Thielen, and Irv Smith Jr. We could have 4 players who surpass 1,000 yards next year if Irv Smith Jr. is as good as people are saying. Now, statistically, last year, he had a great year. And yes, he did have a great year. But we saw a lot of drop passes. And for that reason, I'm more comfortable with the ball going to Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, or Dalvin Cook than I am with Irv Smith Jr. But with that being said, Irv Smith Jr. is one of those players you should take on your fantasy league next year, because he might surprise a lot of people and is going to be drafted maybe somewhere around round 10 or something like that. If you can get him, I would, because I do think Irv Smith Jr. might be one of those sleeper picks that, of course, you're not going to start out the 2021 season, but you might move into maybe take your tight end spot eventually in the season, or maybe a flex spot. I mean, a tight end as a flex, I don't think that would really work. Anyways, I do think that this will help the Vikings cap scenario. Of course it will, where the Vikings can move that money to offensive guard, and this will overall, I don't think anyone can argue against this. This was a good decision. This was a needed decision for the Minnesota Vikings. We hate to see Kyle Rudolph go. Of course, he played with the team for 10 years. This is where he lives in Minnesota. We hate to see him go, and he was a big captain for the team. But once again, it was a needed decision for the team, as it is time to transition into Irv Smith Jr. and Tyler Conklin as our tight end duo, whereas Tyler Conklin is now ready for a contract extension, and Irv Smith Jr. is now ready for the starting role. And this was a needed move for the Minnesota Vikings. We're going to talk about it on this podcast, but I would love to see the Vikings bring in Joe Thuney or Brendan Scherf. Let me know what y'all think.